Thank you, everyone, for joining us today to unpack the governor's budget proposal. This is a really high-level overview. This just came out. This is hot off the press from last week. And so these are really kind of the hot takes of what we see in the budget proposal. And so we'll be going through some details today. My name is Christina Pretorius. I am the Policy Director at Reaching Higher New Hampshire. I'm joined today by our public policy researcher, Kayla Provencher. And the rest of the team is here as well. And we are so excited to have you here with us today. If you have any questions as we move through, please feel free to drop them in the chat. There will be some time after the session for some Q&A. So anything you want clarification on, anything like that, feel free to drop it in the chat. Kayla will also be dropping in some links in the chat for research, reports, things like that as we move through some of the very specific issues. Check out the chat, be monitoring that Q&A. And so with that, let's dive right on in. So just to start a little bit about Reaching Higher New Hampshire, we are a statewide, nonpartisan, nonprofit organization that serves as a public education policy research and engagement resource. So really our goal and our role in the state is to make sure that New Hampshire students, families, and communities, as well as the elected representatives who serve them, have access to data-driven analysis to aid in their decision-making. As a reminder, these presentations are recorded and will be available on our website and YouTube channel. Check out our YouTube channel and our website because we have a number of other webinars that we've been doing on some key topics like school vouchers and things like that. So all of that is there and for your listening pleasure. So to start, we just wanted to do a little bit of context setting. As we move into this budget year, there are a lot of considerations that lawmakers will have to work through, right? We have lower tax revenue due to the elimination of the interest and dividends tax, recent business tax cuts, and business revenues that are lower than anticipated. So we're finding that lawmakers just have less funding to work with and to allocate. There are other expenditures that are expected in the next few months, and there are a lot of open questions, right? So one of the big things is that the New Hampshire Supreme Court is considering two major school funding cases that could significantly impact the budget. There are also pending litigation and settlements from state-run youth detention facilities, potential costs of a new men's prison, and a number of other factors that lawmakers will have to work through. In education specifically, there are a lot of things, a chronic underfunding of our public schools, a long-standing shortfall of school building aid funding for public school infrastructure projects, cuts to lower funding for special education programs and things like that. So we are monitoring a number of different advancements that will have very significant impacts on the budget. So we did want to do a little bit of that context setting before we dive into very specific issues and topics. So when we look at the total state budget, we see that education here makes up about a quarter, 23% of the overall state spending in New Hampshire. We did want to kind of set this context with this graph from our friends at the New Hampshire Fiscal Policy Institute, because it's really important to acknowledge that the entire puzzle that the budget process entails, right? Lawmakers will have to work through pressing issues like education, like childcare, like housing, like transportation, and more. And so as we move through this process, there will be a lot that lawmakers will be considering. If you have any questions or things like that on any of these budget appropriations, on tax revenues, on anything like that, I would highly encourage folks to leverage the New Hampshire Fiscal Policy Institute. This is where this graph comes from, and they do just phenomenal work. So just wanted to shout out there. But they have a wealth of information on a number of topics, including anything to do with the state budget, anything to do with state revenues. We won't be going into revenues a whole lot in this presentation or anything non-education. And so if folks are interested, highly recommend the Fiscal Policy Institute. So when we think about state support for New Hampshire's public schools, we'd want to note that it accounts for just about 20% of the total funding for public education in New Hampshire. And while it's a smaller piece of the puzzle than local funding through property taxes, it is a critical component of how many resources are available to our public schools to meet the needs of our students. So, we see about $1 in $5 that go to public schools are sent to by the state. This local funding right here, this does include the statewide education property tax. So when we're talking about local funding, we are talking about local property taxes, and the state funding is coming from the state non-property tax funding. So, with about $1 in $5 in education coming from the state, the budget process is absolutely critical to making sure that schools have the resources that they need to meet the needs of their students. So before we get into specific budget line items, we did just want to go over incoming Governor Kelly Ayotte. This is her first term, and so we just wanted to kind of do an overview of her education priorities. She's laid these out in a number of places on the campaign trail, during her inaugural address, during her budget address, and some of the high key points that she's talked about that she is championing is school voucher expansion, banning cell phones in the classroom, pledging to support a parental bill of rights, pledging some more resources for workforce training. And she also has mentioned supporting teachers a number of times, most notably in her inaugural address. So when we think about, where she is and what she's thinking about, we see these pretty big priorities, and we see that kind of coming through in her budget proposal that she released last week. There are a couple of major takeaways of the proposed budget we see here in this table. So we see increased funding for school vouchers. In New Hampshire, the school voucher program is known as the Education Freedom Account program. So, in the media, if you're talking to lawmakers, if somebody says Education Freedom Accounts, they're talking about the statewide school voucher program. We also see increased funding for special education reimbursement aid, for charter schools, for the Public School Infrastructure Fund, which is really for student safety, for school safety grants, for dual and concurrent enrollment programs and scholarships for high school students to earn college credit while they're still in high school. We see increased funding allocated for the community college system. As far as kind of neutral line items, the school funding formula, right? So when you look at the actual dollar amount, there is a slight increase for public schools under the school funding formula, but that is not due to anything that the governor did, right? Under state law, the adequacy aid amount increases about 2% per year. That is in statute, so that it has been unchanged. There have been no changes to the state funding formula. So that's a neutral line item. We see decreases in school building aid and allocations for the university system of New Hampshire. So we're going to dive in a little bit into some specifics with each of these things. As we go, again, please feel free to drop things in the chat. So one of the biggest proposals in the governor's proposed budget is school voucher expansion. So this is not the universal school voucher expansion that lawmakers are considering this year. This would remove the income eligibility requirement for public and charter school students. So these are students who would be leaving their public schools, leaving their charter schools for a school voucher program. There is a requirement that students would have to be enrolled for the full prior year. So this isn't a scenario where a student could enroll in a public school for a month and then leave to be eligible for a school voucher. They would have to be enrolled for that full year. Income eligibility requirements under her proposal would still apply for private school students and homeschooled students. So that income requirement of 350% of the federal poverty guideline, which is a very wonky way to say just above the median household income. It's about $109,000 per year for a family of four. Those income requirements would still apply for non-public school students. Her budget does include increases in these line items. So $29 million for FY 2026 and up to $44 million in FY 2027. So she is projecting pretty significant growth of the school voucher program cost over the next biennium. The school voucher expansion under her proposal, that would be effective July 1st, 2026, which is, I think, why we would see this. She is projecting this pretty large bump. It is notable that the program has grown quite a bit since it started in 2021, and the growth of the program has far exceeded state agency, Department of Education, and other projections. And so, we will be watching really closely these actual numbers. So because the school voucher program is not held to the budgeted line item, so even though the governor may say $29 million in this line item, any eligible school voucher that is requested must be funded. So they are projecting $29 million, but it could very well cost more, and there's nothing tethering it to that $29 million. One of the other pieces of the governor's budget is that it does not extend phase-out grants for districts who lose public school students. So the state does have a phase-out grant program for which gives the students district who leave. So when a student leaves a public school, their district would get some of their adequacy dollars to offset that loss in state funding. This is a relatively small program. There is not a whole lot of money that is being used for phase-out grants because public school students are not leaving their schools for school vouchers, right? The majority of the school voucher program is serving students who were not in public schools. So there hasn't really been a huge need for the phase-out grants, but I think it's really important for folks to understand that these phase-out grants are actually set to sunset. The program is set to sunset in 2026. So while that grant program is ending, the governor, by removing that income cap for public school students, is really kind of incentivizing families to leave their public schools, but not extending the phase-out grants that would help local public schools and would help local taxpayers offset that loss. So the governor is proposing an increase for special education aid, and very specifically, this is the special education aid reimbursement program. So this is for reimbursements for districts who have special education costs and expenses that are higher than 3.5 times the statewide average cost per pupil, right? So this is a really complex formula, and it's kind of a really wonky way to say that this reimbursement program offsets the district's costs for providing special education for students who have high needs. They have out-of-district placements, they have other services that may cost well above what the average statewide cost per pupil is. So districts do have to get these costs approved by the New Hampshire Department of Education. So this is a true reimbursement program. These reimbursement requests have already been approved. And we can see here that, for the past couple of years, the requested amount has exceeded the funding amount. So in 2023, there was about $39 million in requested reimbursements. The program was funded at about $34 million. In 2024, just this past year, we've seen a quite an increase in the amount of requested reimbursements for nearly $50 million, but the program was still funded at the $34 million. And so what the governor is proposing is to increase the available money for reimbursement funding to just about $50 million to kind of match the amount that was requested this year. So in 2025 and 2026, the reimbursement money that would be available would be about $49.9 million per year. It's important to know that this is the budgeted amount. So in these cases where the requested amount does exceed the funded amount, they do a proration. And so I think the proration for 2024 was about 63%. So if the district would get about 63% of what they submitted for reimbursement. And so in 2025 and 2026, if requests exceed this $49.9 million, then that would also be prorated to kind of make up for that. One thing that we do want, so there are two things that I did want to note with this special education aid. One is that the reimbursement line items would be held at $49.9 million. So they would not be responsive to the requested amounts. So, when we're thinking about this reimbursement program, that is a static number. So it would be prorated. So, if there is a large growth in that special education reimbursement, that would be held at the $49.9 million. So that's something that's really important to note. Another thing that we saw was that the governor's her proposed budget does not appear to fully fund the 2024 reimbursement requests. This has been a pretty significant conversation over the past couple of months, where this is about a $17 million shortfall in special education funding. There have been a lot of conversations among lawmakers about closing that gap and backfilling that amount. But the governor's proposed budget does not appear to do that for 2024 reimbursements. The governor is also proposing an increase in charter school funding, and this is twofold. So this is in both federal funding and in state funding. So New Hampshire received a federal charter school grant to expand charter schools a couple of years ago. It was a total of $46 million. So the governor's budget proposal does include $12.7 million per year in FY26 and FY27. We do see that the actual cost of this program, the department only used $5.9 million in 2024 for this federal charter school grant. We have seen kind of a slowdown in the number of new charter schools in New Hampshire over the past couple of years. This grant, which we've had for several years now, really fueled some pretty significant charter school growth in its early years, and we've seen that kind of level off a little bit. But it is something that we will be watching. There is $12.7 million in federal funding per year allocated for this program. And then the governor is increasing the budget for state funding of charter schools by 11%. So we saw about $121 million budgeted in the last biennium, and that has increased to about $134 million budgeted this biennium. So one thing that I did want to point out here is that, like education freedom account funding and like public school funding, charter school funding, is not held to those budgeted amounts. If it does exceed, the state is obligated to pay for charter school for per pupil charter school funding. So that, I think, is just the kind of the governor's best guess of what charter school growth and enrollment will look like. But that could go up and down or down depending on actual charter school enrollment. So we are also seeing an increase in the Public School Infrastructure Fund. This was a program that was established in 2018. And these are funds that are intended for school safety and security, right? There are a number of allowable uses under law, but including the condition of a school building being classified as being clear and imminent danger, emergency preparedness, ADA compliance, school busing costs and transportation costs and those kinds of things. But over the past couple of years, this funding has really been used for school hardening. So you'll see it here, things like surveillance, things like emergency alert systems, security cameras, and things like that. So that's been really kind of the big uses of the fund. In 2024, the actual budgeted amount was $2.7 million, but we see that the governor has allocated $10 million over the biennium plus a staff member, adding a staff member. So these grants are for public and non-public schools. The information on grants are on the department website. They do say exactly what they're funding and what the projects are for, but wanted to note that. The governor is also has also proposed expanding dual and concurrent enrollment scholarships and funding for that. So dual and concurrent enrollment allows students to earn college credit for courses taken at their local high schools, also for college courses taken online through the Early College Online program at the community college system of New Hampshire, and early college on a college campus, which allows high school students to attend courses at a community college for free of charge. They can earn high school and college credits at the same time. So under current law, scholarships are available for 10th, 11th, and 12th graders. Students can take up to 4 courses per year tuition free. They can take more than that if they want, but they're required to pay the tuition for those. But the state does cover 4 courses per year. In 2024-2025, the allocation was $2.5 million per year. The governor is bumping that up to $3 million per year over the biennium. We have heard from the community college system that requests for these scholarships has outpaced the budgeted amounts. And it is unclear whether the $3 million per year, that $500,000 per year increase, would be able to fund additional scholarships, or if that's really kind of to just keep up with the rising cost of education, of community college credits, and that kind of thing. So more to come there, but there is a slight increase in allocations for the dual and concurrent enrollment program. So with that, we kind of went over most of the green arrows. I did also want to note that there is additional funding allocated for the community college system on top of the dual and concurrent enrollment program. And that is really intended for tuition freezes at New Hampshire's community colleges, expansion of career and technical training, and workforce credentialing programming for in-demand jobs. And that is taken really right from the governor's overview of the community college system line item. So those are, it's really kind of to fund the workforce development that she's been talking about on the campaign trail, in her inaugural address, and in her budget speech. So we're going to move on to the school funding formula next, and public school funding. So as I mentioned earlier, there are no changes to the statewide school funding formula under her proposed budget. In current statute, the per student grants and differentiated aid amounts increase 2% per year. So we can see here that the 2026 per student adequacy amount would be about $4,266. And then in 2027, we anticipate that being $4,351 per student. So, this is an annual increase, an annual statutory increase. One thing that's important to note here, though, is that, the state funding formula is a constant 2%. It is not responsive to real-time inflation or increases in things like operating school buses, teacher salaries, things like that. So it's not responsive to the real costs. This is just kind of per student funding that the state says that's what it's going to be. So there are a number of components to the formula. There is that base adequacy amount right here. There is a funding stream for students who qualify for free and reduced lunch programs. There is additional funding for students who qualify for special education services, who qualify for English language learners services. And then there is a component of the formula that is need-based, and that's through the extraordinary needs grants. And so that gives several $million directly to school districts that have lower property wealth and have high concentrations of students who qualify for free and reduced price lunch. There are also hold harmless grants because in the last biennium, lawmakers changed the funding formula quite a bit, particularly in that targeted need category. So they made a hold harmless grant so that districts would not receive less. And so that block grant carries year over year. It is reduced by 20% each biennium. So we will see districts who had hold harmless grants will actually receive slightly less funding in that category in this biennium. Next, we have school building aid. So school building aid provides state funding to offset the costs of building projects, renovation projects, and this is for public schools and charter schools. In the past couple of years, lawmakers did make charter schools eligible for school building aid. That's relatively new. And so we're still waiting to see how that impacts the school building aid program, the fund, and how it kind of folds into the mix. So school building aid grants range from 30 to 60% of the project cost, and they are dependent, the rate is dependent on a number of factors. What the actual project is for. Is it to address safety concerns? Is it to address overcrowding and those kinds of things, as well as actual district specific indicators? So is there population growth in that district? Are there economic factors? What is the property wealth of that school district? What is the median household income of that school district? And things like that. So that really determines the percentage. So the school building aid program had been on moratorium for over a decade in the 2010s. And it had just recently come out of moratorium and has been actually funded. In 2022, there were a total of 17 projects requested for this biennium that we're in right now, for a total of $227 million in requests. The program was allocated at $78.6 million, which means that there's a substantial amount of those projects that went unfunded. And those projects are on top of all of the school building aid projects that have been building up while this program was in moratorium and wasn't funded. So I think the long and the short of it is that $227 million of requested projects, that's in 1 year. And we know that for years and years and years, there have been school infrastructure needs that have gone unaddressed because the school building aid program was put on hold, was put in moratorium. So we know that there is a significant need for public school infrastructure support in New Hampshire. In this biennium that we're in right now, 2024-2025, lawmakers allocated about $78.6 million for the program. In the governor's proposed budget, she is proposing $26.8 million, and that is really for what are called tail payments. So the way that the school building aid program used to operate was that the state would fund a lot of building aid projects year after year, but just over a longer period of time. And so these are those tail payments for building aid projects that were funded years ago, right? So these are just kind of the payments that the state is obligated to fund. We're not seeing any funding for new school building aid projects in this governor's proposed budget. I will note that there is a House bill that is being considered, House Bill 366, and that would increase school building aid to $60 million, and that excluding those tail payments. And so that would infuse quite a bit of money into the school building aid program. It's unclear where that will go. I have heard that the Department of Education had, in their requested agency budget, did not include any new projects because lawmakers were really still kind of working it out. And so it's unclear if the governor is taking the same approach. If she said, hey, listen, like lawmakers are working through this, they can do that in their House and Senate phases, or what the intention behind it is. But we are not seeing any additional funding for school building aid for new projects. The governor in her proposed budget would also require school districts to ban cell phones during the school day. There are a number of exceptions there. And there are some guidelines, but her budget also allocates $1 million in grant funding to assist school boards in implementing policies, cell phone free policies. So this is a big theme of her administration. She's talked about it quite a bit. It is a big priority for her. And so we're seeing that kind of come through in her budget as well. So we are a little bit over time, but just wanted to go through a couple of other takeaways. The governor's proposed budget does authorize electronic gaming machines. It does provide less funding for the university system. It codifies the funding structure of the state's virtual learning academy charter school. And it also makes slight changes to the determination and notification of adequacy grants to school districts. So these last two pieces, they are pretty technical, but they're just kind of statutory changes in the administration of payments for school districts. And we can share more information via email, but those are really kind of admin specific changes. So as we wrap up, just an overview of the state budget process. So we have completed this budget proposal line, this blue box. It is now in the House phase. The House Finance Division, the House Finance Committee has met. They met last week, and they're continuing to meet, and they will continue to meet over the next couple of weeks. So that bill is in committee, the budget is in committee. It will go to the full House for a vote, and then it will move on to the Senate, where the Senate Finance Committee will break it down, make any changes that they want to, and then it will go to a committee of conference if the Senate's version is different from the House's version, where the House and Senate will sit down, they'll kind of iron out the differences, come up with a proposal to send to the governor for the governor's signature. The state budget takes effect on July 1st of this year. So as you can imagine, there is a lot for lawmakers to do in a very short amount of time. So this will be a very quick, it is a very busy next couple of months. We will be breaking down the budgets in each of these phases, in the House phase, in the Senate phase, and what is actually signed by the governor. So please stay tuned. We will give some more information as that moves through. So with that, I sincerely appreciate folks' time. Feel free to reach out to me. Again, I'm Christina Pretorius. I'm Reaching Higher New Hampshire's Policy Director. My email is there. I'm joined today by Kayla. All of Reaching Higher staff's contact information is there. Our social media is there. Feel free to reach out to us at any time. And with that, I'm going to stop the recording, but I'm going to see if there are any questions.